In today's episode of West Virginia versus Natalie Cochran for the murder of her husband, Michael Cochran, we're going to hear from the plaintiff, which is the state of West Virginia, their experts, and what does the lead investigating officer have to say? Stay tuned. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Rebecca, and I recap live trials. So I am currently covering this West Virginia case against Natalie Cochran. Now, Natalie has already been pled guilty and is serving an 11-year, 3-month sentence for her Ponzi scheme. Now, briefly, what is that? She was taking investors. They had 2 companies. Her and her husband, Michael, had 2 companies, and I don't know if it's they or not. That's a big issue in the trial, if it was they or her. To what extent was this deceased involved in these companies? But nonetheless, they but they got investors based on, we're going to get these arms deals, these government contracts where we can supply arms and armor to the government. And once the contracts pay off, we can repay you or you can reinvest. What a deal. So the Ponzi scheme is how it works is nobody ever gets paid off. The second layer of investors pays off the first layer of investors, and then so on and so forth, kind of like a pyramid, but they call it a Ponzi scheme. She was found guilty and entered into a plea deal that netted her 11 years and 3 months. So fast forward, well, actually, before she took all this plea, back on February 6th of 2019, her husband suddenly collapses. This is the day that they are supposed to be taking a flight to Bank of America to provide the wet signatures to open an account with that bank. So apparently that bank required wet signatures. In other words, you actually have to sign something, not something online where you pretend like you're signing something, but actually required in-person signatures. Now, there's some contention as to why Michael thought he was going up there. It's alleged that Michael thought he was going up there because he believed they were withholding, he tried to make some kind of purchase and was told he couldn't get, the account something was wrong with the account. He couldn't get the money. Well, he couldn't get the money because there was no account. Never got it, never was officially open. But so he was going to go confront this guy. And there is evidence from one of the witnesses that testified that there was a prior incident at BB&T, not Bank of America, another bank, where Michael got upset because he couldn't get funds. And he was so upset that his friend, he called his friend came and he calmed him down and whatever. So to what extent was Michael involved in this business? Because prosecution is alleging that she murdered him to prevent him learning, because that if they took the flight to that Bank of America that day, he was going to learn that this was not a legitimate business. Bank of America was on to them, and that he was going to discover what was going on. I have my doubts as to whether he was involved or not. Personally, I think he was, based on everything I've heard. I think he was. But so why would she kill him? Good question. All right, so let's go through the testimony for day 4 and 5, and I am going to combine these because a lot of it is pretty much it's expert testimony from the plaintiff's attorneys. Experts. First expert is an endocrinology expert. Now, endocrinologist is the person you go to for your thyroid, for your pancreas, which is that's the organ that produces insulin. So an endocrinologist deals with all kinds of glands in the body that secrete hormones and things. And they'll help you regulate that stuff. They'll help you regulate your insulin, your thyroid. Those are the 2 main ones, but other stuff as well. So in any case, this woman, she has testified and at apparently in Clarksville at Johnson VA Hospital in Clarksville, West Virginia, there was some big thing where this nursing assistant was murdering people by injection of insulin. She was one of the experts on that case, and I looked that case up because I want to cover it. The trial's already said and done, but I want to dive into that case because it sounds really, really interesting. So one of the things she was asked off the bat, what do you believe the cause of death was? And she says, well, I'm not a cause of death expert, but based on everything I've reviewed, but she has an opinion. Based on everything she reviewed, she believes that he died due to hypoglycemia, resulting from brain swelling, in other words, cerebral edema. And after pretty much eliminating everything else, and this is what both experts had to say, after they've done what they need to do, done the testing, they're left with the only explanation being the injection of insulin. So she said that, there are tests that can be run at the hospital, or I guess you can run them anywhere, but there's tests that the hospital could have done that would show if he had exogenous insulin. So I can't say it. Exogenous insulin just means insulin that came from a bottle. It didn't come from your pancreas. It came from somewhere else. So there are tests you can run to tell if this came from somewhere else. And I'm going to combine the testimony of these two witnesses. The next witness that's on the stand is forensic pathologist. So what he said is that the pancreas produces two substances. One is the insulin, and the other one is C-peptide. And those molecules split. So they split evenly. So when someone tests right away, those molecules should be even. The C-peptide level, the insulin level should correlate. But in someone who's been injected exogenous insulin, so it came from somewhere else but this person's pancreas, into the body, you're going to get a very high insulin level with a C-peptide that's down here. So going back to the other expert, she says that these are tests that pretty much nobody does because their focus in an emergency room is treating an emergency. And if you come in and your blood sugar is 21, they're not going to run any tests to find out why. They're going to give you some blood sugar. But if they had run tests to find out why, we might not be sitting here today. We might know that it was insulin that was injected by someone else or even himself. In any case, it wasn't done. And because she did say that those tests have to be run before you administer the treatment. They administered 50% glucose, which is pretty concentrated IV glucose. Those tests have to be done before that administration to be accurate. So then she was asked to list other possible causes of low blood sugar. And she said there are 13. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And I'll run through those really quickly. Your blood sugar drops from diabetes. Well, he didn't have diabetes. You have end-stage liver failure. He didn't have end-stage liver failure. You have end-stage kidney failure. He didn't have that. You have severe systemic infection. Now, there is a question about whether or not he had a systemic infection because your white count normally is supposed to be around 11. His was 17 when he got to the hospital, but he wasn't having a fever. He didn't have any other symptoms of sepsis, but did he or didn't he? We don't know. Severe malnutrition. This guy was not malnourished. Alcohol consumption without eating will lower your blood sugar. So if you go consume a bunch of alcohol, please eat something with it. Insufficient adrenal gland. His adrenal gland was fine. Meds unrelated to diabetes. And she went through all of his meds and didn't find anything that was related to diabetes. A tumor of the pancreas. He didn't have a tumor of the pancreas. Gastric bypass can actually make the body act like it has a pancreatic tumor and lowers your blood sugar. I didn't know that. Very interesting. And antibiotics. And he wasn't on any antibiotics. So what does that leave? Insulin injection. So he had a low potassium level too. So she said that was more evidence that it was insulin that had been injected. They also found benzodiazepines in his urine. No one knows why or where those came from. So that was her testimony. Friday, or was that Friday? I don't know. Monday, Tuesday. I lost track of the days. Anyway, day 5, we have a forensic pathologist on the stand. Now, this guy, he's interesting. He actually authored an opinion on behalf of the federal government in the George Floyd case. Remember George Floyd, who was suffocated by the police officer, who's now serving time? He talked about the C-peptide, the insulin. He was asked to do an autopsy 4 years later. 4 years after the death. 2023, he does an autopsy. Or 24. Yeah, 23, he does an autopsy. 4 years later. 24, he does his report. So I said, first of all, there's no evidence of a head injury, because you're going to find out later on that she claims he hit his head on granite countertop. He did a CT scan, no evidence of a head injury. So his conclusion was it was this insulin administered, because there's just no other explanation for what happened to Michael. The other thing that they talk about is, and this is interesting, I'm going to combine several different people testifying. Michael's blood sugar when he gets to the hospital is really low. Now, this woman that testified before, she's like, it could have been really low because it was a finger stick. They just poke you and get a little drop of blood. But when the actual blood sugar came back, it was low, but not like 50. And I don't know if that was run before the D50 was given or not, but his blood sugar at the hospital kept going. They'd get it up and it would go back down. Insulin doesn't do that to you, especially insulin administered on the 6th, and you're there on the 7th and the 8th and the 9th, and when these things are going up and down. In fact, insulin works within 15 to 30 minutes. This regular fast-acting, it wasn't regular, it was fast-acting insulin that you take before meals. If he had gotten that, if she had administered that to him, it would have taken 15 to 30 minutes to work. Was he conscious when she administered it? Was he sleeping on the couch when she administered it? Like, when did this administration happen? So after his collapse, he sits on that couch where the contractors put him for almost 8 hours before he is sent to the hospital. By then, your blood sugar's going to have lowered, and it doesn't continue to work after 8 hours. You know, if you're a diabetic, you got to take more at lunch, you got to take more at dinner, but it's not going to keep working over several days, this insulin. So the defense asked some interesting questions here. He said, first asked the guy, this was the lead detective, did you have any money in this scheme? Did I have any money? No, I didn't invest. Anyway, so he shows him the plea agreement, and there's no mention of Michael in the plea agreement, the Ponzi scheme plea agreement. It just lists her as the offender. But that's not unusual. That's kind of not a fair thing to put in front of the jury, because in any court, they tailor the plea agreement specifically to the person. So we find out that the morning of February 6th. Both she and the defendant are out at the house. They're up and out. He's off to Starbucks. She goes to the doctor. Now, the plaintiff, the defense attorney does not want us to hear what happened at this doctor visit. Apparently, she went to the doctor on the 2 different days, the day before and then that day. And that morning she went to the doctor, and I don't know what she told them, but she obtained a shot of promethazine and some pills, promethazine pills. Now, promethazine is a drug that's administered pretty much for nausea and vomiting. So she must have given them a history that she had been nauseous. So she goes home with promethazine pills. Interesting fun fact, Michael was highly allergic to promethazine. There is kind of during this testimony, it slipped out that she had requested insulin when she went to the doctor that morning. But of course, there were objections and, disregard and blah. I don't know why we can't know what she did at that doctor's office that morning. So Michael goes to Starbucks. Then this officer was shown a picture of Michael's body. And of course, there's objections. And she's like, I'm just trying to lay some foundation here. And over the objections, he testified that the photo of his body was taken by the defendant. What? Why are you photographing your husband's body on the floor of the kitchen? He's not dead. You should be getting him some medical treatment. Anyway, so she gave 3 different interviews to this lead detective. One was on April 8th of 2019, and it was in person, and she was with her mom. The other 2 interviews were over the phone. So she said that morning they were together on the couch, and that Michael suddenly goes into the kitchen and she hears a thud. So she goes into the kitchen, she sees him on the floor, and she sees this enclophamine on the countertop. Now, this enclophamine, remember the 3 vials that were entered into evidence? The first vial was the steroid. The second vial was this enclophamine. So apparently enclophamine is used by bodybuilders and it can lower blood sugar. So she says, oh, I saw it over there on the countertop. The third vial we saw was the insulin. And nobody knew where this enclophamine came from. But she says, oh, I saw it on the countertop. Then on May 7th of 2019, her version of the events were they sat on the couch for about an hour, and she said Michael was the best she'd never seen him so good. And I'm assuming she meant health. I don't know. When all of a sudden he goes in the kitchen, he's throwing up in the sink, and he fell and hit his head on the granite countertop. And then during that time, she said that the enclophamine she found in the kitchen cupboard towards the back. Then the next interview was the next day, May 8th of 2019. She says when she returned home that morning, Michael was sleeping on the couch. He continued sleeping for like 45 minutes to an hour. When he woke up, he went into the kitchen and collapsed. So she did say that Michael regularly used insulin for his bodybuilding. It's the first time I've heard that. He injected himself. And one of the places he injected himself was in his back. That makes no sense. You don't inject insulin in your back. First of all, it's pretty difficult to do. But second of all, there's so many other places. I don't know why you would do that. You get to be a contortionist to pretty much do that. She never administered the insulin to him. And this officer said he had never heard of bodybuilders using insulin. Well, apparently there was a Mr. Universe that died of insulin injections. That it's very common for bodybuilders to use insulin during their regimen. So it was here we get some more additions to how bad this woman is. Apparently, after his death, she continued the business, continued to get investors after he died. And when so he dies in February, March, April, May, June, when the high schoolers are getting out of high school, she shows up at the local high school and starts giving out scholarships that were worthless. Can you imagine? These kids think they're so excited. They got scholarships. Where do you think we should go to college? And maybe they change their plans based on now getting this scholarship. And oh, terrible. Then when they seized property, they did the search of her home. When they seized the property, he sat down with her, this officer, and he said, here's a list of the property that we're seizing. Go through it. And it's several pages long. She's going through it, and she says, oh, this insulin, because that's one of the things they found, that's from my neighbors. I kept that there for my neighbor's kid, not for the bodybuilding. Okay. So then he was asked questions about whether Mr. Mike Cochran, her husband, was a controlling person. He said, I don't know. I haven't heard any evidence about that, and we haven't. But the defense attorney is making it seem like he was very controlling in the relationship. At one point, he took her phone away from her and kept it for 2 months, and then in other times he would restrict her use of the computers at home. He says, I don't know. I have no idea. So they were using 4 different bank accounts that both of them were the signatories on. And only one of those bank accounts was personal. I think it might have been even more than 4 different bank accounts. The other ones were for the business. Then they had 2 businesses. So they were living a very lavish lifestyle. Listen to some of their expenses, because they were taking these expenses out of commingled funds. Some of the funds were in the personal account. Some of the funds were in the other bank accounts. They were all coming from investors. There were no contracts paying off. So they purchased 2 commercial buildings together. They both signed off on these loans for these buildings. They purchased a Polaris and another vehicle. They purchased a 1964 Cobra antique car, multiple motorcycles, earrings. They spent money on heating and cooling. He spent money remodeling their $300,000 home. He bought a horse trailer. These are just a few of the things that were listed. And then when apparently when Natalie responded to the complaint, the criminal complaint for the Ponzi scheme, she listed their assets as $522 million in assets, which turns out not to be true. But all of these things were confiscated to pay off the investors, and I hope that they did get to pay off these investors. So there's some text messages that were shown, and they were very difficult to read, so I'm not going to show them to you, but I'll tell you what the first one said. There were 3 different text messages from Natalie to various relatives. First one to her uncle, and that one said, after all your contracts pay out, I won't be able to reinvest them anymore. So he was telling these people, oh, your contract paid out, but I reinvested the money. Well, I won't be able to do that anymore. I will cut your checks as they come in. I'm very sorry. I wasn't transparent with Michael on all the contracts we had in the works. So this is being offered as evidence that she wasn't being forthcoming with Michael, not totally transparent. And she says the same thing in 2 other text messages, one to her sister and one to Mike's sister, all who invested money into the same. And so Why would she be writing the exact same thing to 3 different people? Like, there's a question of whether she wrote these. Did Michael write these? Did she write these? Who wrote these emails? Because he had her phone for a couple of months. Did he send those emails or those texts to relatives? Who knows? Just all questions that are looming out there. The other thing is, they did finally say where the enclophamine, apparently how they got it. Because I was like, how did you get that? It was not in the home. Michael's parents had the enclophamine vial because Natalie brought it over to them after he collapsed. Not that day, but sometime after that. She brings it over to them. Now, was she setting up an alibi? Because enclophamine is known to lower blood sugar. So was she saying, okay, there's your explanation, even though it was really insulin, there's your explanation. But we know that what was in that vial was not enclophamine. It was something completely benign. So was she setting this up as sort of not really alibi, but, hey, look, this is probably the murder, not the murder, but this is probably what causes death. Here it is. It's not insulin that I injected. Yeah, interesting, huh? Now, there was a text message that was found where Michael was so mad that they weren't going on February 6th that he took 2 blood pressure pills. I don't know who she texted that to. So interesting cases. I want to make sure I got everything for you from those days. I've kind of got it all over the place here. So, fun fact. State rests their case. We're done. What? You're done? That's it? That's the evidence, guys. And I'm going to say at best, this is going to be a hung jury because honestly, I don't know what to believe at this point. Remember, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. There's a lot of doubt here about, was he using it for bodybuilding, the insulin? She has several different stories about why that insulin was in the house. Oh, it was the neighbors. Oh, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. The other question in my mind is, I talked about him sitting on that couch for a long period of time after he collapsed from insulin administration. Did she administer more insulin sometime that day? There were 9 different people in and out of the house during that 8 hours. Her sister, neighbors, the contractors, her sister's boyfriend, all kinds of people in and out. She did actually request one of the neighbors, the one with the boy, the son, can you bring over some insulin to help me with my cancer? The cancer that nobody could prove she had, or disprove, apparently, because we haven't seen her medical records. They're keeping all that hush hush. I don't know why. So anyway, I'll be interested to see what the defense is. It doesn't appear she's going to testify. I don't think she needs to be honest with you. A lot of stuff has come in through the mouth of her attorney that the jury has heard. Let me know what your opinion is. Like, if you were asked right now to decide this case, what would you think? Now, the judge was asked that because the defense moved for a judgment of acquittal. That's the routine motion at the close of the state's evidence that's always made. Just saying that in the light most favorable to the state, they haven't made a case for murdering Michael Cochran. And the judge disagreed. He goes, I think there's a case here, but I'm going to let the jury decide. Like, he's kicking the can down the road. I don't blame him. Because this is a tough one. I mean, a lot of circumstantial. And he mentioned that. It's a lot of circumstantial evidence. No direct evidence. None. Because, when you autopsy somebody 4 years after the fact, you're not going to find anything related to insulin in the body that's going to be helpful. The most he could do was, rule out that head injury. That's about it, because everything else is decomposed. And one of the fastest organs in the body to decompose is the pancreas that produces the insulin. So who knows? Anyway, guys, that's the show for today. I hope you enjoyed the content. Don't forget to subscribe. Share this with someone you think might enjoy listening while they're crafting. And I will see you in the next video. Take care, everybody. Bye.